Hey, my name is Ulrik, and I want to show you our method that we have used with more than a dozen clients to more than double revenues in perpetual to SaaS transformations. So we have served more than 2 dozen clients in perpetual to SaaS transformations, all the way from a few $100 licenses all the way up to licenses worth hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars. And we have used the same 4-step framework, the 4C framework, to organize this work, and it has worked brilliantly. So I'm going to walk you through our 4C framework, sort of tell you a little bit about how it works and what to be aware of, and then give you a few closing thoughts that should give you an understanding of how you can think about your perpetual to SaaS transformation. Okay. So the 4 steps are connect, communicate, capture, consent. So very quickly, connect means that you get to know who your customers are and how they're using your software. So this is a pull where you get information from the market to you. Communicate is when you push, you're able to get something to the customers, which means that you can actually give them communications, new legal terms, you can even push technical updates to their solution. Capture is where you legally and technically grab the keys to the solution so that you can actually have a good negotiation sort of leverage point. And consent, this is where you now send them the new contract, the new terms, the new deal, and then you close them on that new deal. So I want to go through them sort of in a little bit more detail one at a time. So connect, we have sort of 2 points. We have who and we have what. So who means who the user is, and it also means who the customer is. So this can actually be very different depending on whether you're selling, let's say, large customers or small, meaning that are you selling something for tens or hundreds of thousands or $1 million, or you're selling something for hundreds or maybe $1,000. Because if you do low price, high volume, there is a very high likelihood that you are using resellers and distributors, that the way that you're sort of sending out the software in the perpetual way has been lost in time, and you have tens of thousands of customers all over the world and you have no idea who they are. You might not have a name, you might not have an address, there's just no clue. If you have very large contracts and you sell sort of on a classic perpetual to maintenance model where you say we're going to sell you this sort of perpetual license, it's going to be $1 million up front, and we'll sell you a maintenance deal with 20 or 30% for 4 years, and then we'll renew, we try to sell you another perpetual license, all this, you know who the customer is. So in the low price, high volume scenario, you first need to sort of find out who they are, and there might be multiple licenses, and then you need to sort of collect them into customer accounts. The best way that I know of is to either use the existing sales channel, so basically the way that you reach them through sales, and try to work backwards either by selling them something new, let's say a free subscription, you give them a connector or something else that they can use that allows you to understand who they are. So let's say you send them some sort of update or free update or connector or add-on to the existing perpetual license. And then as that spreads out through the market, they now log on to that. That's a SaaS thing. It gets them online. It prompts them to actually give you information about who the user is. They maybe put in the old license number of the perpetual thing, whatever it is. And now you start to capture information from the market like this. You can also do it commercially, saying, hey, we have a new, we actually might want to convert them to SaaS already, where we say, if you turn in your old perpetual license, we're going to give you a discount on the SaaS for a time, or you can get this sort of connector add-on for free in some way. So you can use sort of a variety of different methods to figure out who, but you should end up with a full catalog spreadsheet of all of your customers, knowing who they are overall, sort of the business unit, their address, how you basically send them an invoice, and that's sort of the idea. And then the what is, how are they actually using your solution? So again, if you have a large installation somewhere, that just means that you need to sort of go there and figure out, well, what is the actual usage? What is the throughput they're pushing through? It's it can be data volumes, it can be active users, it can be anything that is relevant to your solution, but it matters in terms of figuring out, well, how are we actually going to price this in the future? Because if you had this idea that you were going to price the new SaaS subscription on a per user based price, and it actually turns out that there aren't a lot of users, they have a lot of value out of the solution, but it's actually with very few people involved, then maybe you don't want to have a seat or user-based license. And maybe you find out that, oh, they're actually pushing like a lot of API calls or different sort of like SQL rows or whatever it is through your solution. And you say, okay, that makes sense, I'll price by that. But to figure out these sort of metrics or the telemetry of the solution is actually really important in order for you to understand which customers are using it more or less and how you might actually structure a new pricing model. So this is all connect, and this is all from them to you. Communicate is now from you to them, right? So this is where you now get to communicate with them. So that's just comms, and that just means that you can send them an email. It might be that you can have a prompt somewhere in the solution or the interface of the solution that tells them something or asks them to do something, whatever it is. So basically it is this ability to just like send words to the customer. And again, you need to distinguish between, depending on how well you did this step up here, are you sending words, communications to the user of the solution, or are you sending it to the buyer of the solution? Very different, right? But ideally you want both. You want to be able to both communicate to the buyer and to the user. If you have to choose, then do buyer. Always do buyer. Next step, legal. So legal is where you now get to send sort of updated ULAs, end user license agreements or master service agreements, something like that, to the, and that can be the user or the buyer or both in some way, where you basically say, hey, we just have an update to our terms and conditions. Please, click yes in order to get access, hopefully get access to the software and continue. So that's how you do it. This is where you prepare the next step of capture. And then you have technical updates. So that might mean that you say, hey, we have a way in which we can update, like firmware update your solution. So if you have large, let's say on-prem perpetual licenses that you used to sell for $1 million, you have maintenance contracts, you might actually have professional service revenue. You have a way to actually get to the customer's installation and change it, right? So you can provide some sort of update to it. If you have, let's say, thousands and thousands of, or tens of thousands of, let's say, low price, high volume customers around the world, not really knowing who they are, it might be that you push some sort of firmware update and you just make it available on your website to download, or you push it out through your channels and then it spreads in some way. In this case, it's not going to spread to 100% of your install base, but hopefully it is going to spread wide, and at least like the idea would be that it spreads to the ones that are actively using your solution more, which are also the ones that are more valuable to you in the future. But you have the communication, the legal, and the technical sort of push ability. Then with capture, you now use these to legally capture, and then technically capture your customers as well. So this basically means that you now send them a legal update that say, hey, I get to change prices and charge you for this when I want. And you can bury this in various ways. And you definitely should have your lawyers, especially if you're selling in multiple countries, be part of this process where you get the ability to change the commercial terms, maybe even also charge them based on their existing solution, maybe even on other parts of it. I'll get into that a little bit later. And then technically, you can push a technical update, let's say a license manager or something like that, or a specific connector or something around the software that now allows you to shut it off. And that's the idea. So if you have legal capture, that means that you are legally allowed to send them an invoice in a new way. But if you don't have any technical capture, they can just not, like they can just ignore you, right? So that actually means that for you to have real leverage in the negotiation and actually get to consent where they consent to the new price, you need to have the right to send an invoice, and then you need to have the power to force them to pay it if they don't want to. So ideally, you'd want to be able to say, hey, from the terms and conditions that we pushed back in July, we actually have the right to raise these prices, and because the way that you have been using our license manager and connector, we also have the ability to shut all your users out of the solution if you don't pay us by Christmas. So that is when you then consent, send them the new deal. And then you try to close them on that. So the idea is that for this result to be good, you need to do sort of the right work up here, right? So let's say that you have 10,000 customers, sort of low price, high volume. If you do a really good job and you get all 10,000, that is great. You figure out exactly what they're going to use it for. You get to and that means that you suddenly figure out that in some of these sort of 10,000 customers, they're actually they're using it for business critical purposes. There are 100 accounts that use it for business critical purposes, and they might be large accounts. And then you're able to communicate to them. You find out who they are. You can push legal stuff to them. You can push technical stuff to them. So now you push legal and technical stuff to them, and then suddenly you send them a new contract and say, hey, you remember those 5 developer licenses that you bought for $1,000 a year, and you've been buying those for the past 10 years to run your solution. Now we actually know that you're using that to structure your entire, let's say, middleware layer of the organization, and we have all the telemetry on that solution, and we are now legally actually allowed to price you based on the volume of that solution, and we can actually shut down that solution. So instead of paying us $5,000 a year, we now want you to pay $3 million. Real case. You can actually do these kinds of things if you structure it correctly, which is why you can take a case and double it or 10x it in going from these sort of perpetual to SaaS transformations. So usually it looks something like this on a timeline. You're going to have your perpetual, and then sometimes you have some sort of free intermediate step, and then you can either go to small monetization or you can go straight to sort of large monetization. So it can go something like this. Okay, we're here now, we're sort of preparing, connect, and communicate. Sometimes we launch a connector, we launch a license manager, we launch sort of firmware updates, we launch sort of maybe a free subscription somewhere. We do something that allows us to especially sort of do these sort of first 2 steps up here. And then we actually might, as part of the capture process, get people on a very low priced subscription or something like that. Or we might go, before we go to the new model where we price people a lot, right? So a lot of people just stop here, right? So they say, hey, this is sort of mission accomplished, and they miss out on this sort of the large money, which is sort of the reinventing of the model. So a lot of perpetual licenses, especially high volume, low price, were sold on a user-based license. And basically we're now just changing the SaaS model to another user-based license. And then we're missing the step of maybe changing the model to a not user-based license that capture the actual value of what your solution actually does. These are the steps if you just want to shift to SaaS. These are the steps if you actually want to shift, let's say, to real money. And then the difference is that you need to be much more detailed as you go through this. You need to have a much better what understanding, and you need to have a much better who understanding in terms of finding the buyer, not just the user. You need to find out the telemetry of the customer, what they're using it for. You need to have really, really good ability to push or communicate stuff to them so that you can legally and technically capture them, so that you can get them to actually consent to the new big money. As I said, we've used this model a dozen or so times with different clients. We've used it in North America, sort of where they have a different sort of legal set. We used it in Europe. We used it in sort of global companies where we're selling to sort of 100+ countries. It works. It just does. It usually takes about 2 years. So usually it shouldn't necessarily, but it just does, because most companies that we work with spend about a year really preparing for this step, sometimes going into this step. And then when we actually sort of capture and then move to consent, usually there are some notification periods, like 3 months, where we need to push something and then wait until it sort of spreads in the installations. There might be a sort of if we send new legal terms, there might be sort of a 3-month waiting period until they default accept them. Then we actually might want to have a new deal that we push out and then give another 3 months to negotiate and so forth. And then might actually have another extra 3 months at the end before we actually start to shut down their solution in order to force them to the negotiation table. So 2 years is sort of about the process it takes. It's actually not very expensive for the organization to run, but with this way, you should be able to not have that revenue dip that a lot of people talk about in perpetual SaaS transformation, to actually have a revenue lift, because you can actually move sort of straight from these steps to this step here because often if people just do this, it's actually lower than their original perpetual model that they had. This was a sort of a quick walkthrough of the 4C models, perpetual to SaaS. We've used it a bunch of times. I hope it makes sense. I hope it helps you. Good luck with it.